I have not traveled the world, but I'm mindful of the world, if that makes sense. Listen to different speakers from around the globe. You kind of put an ear, and you can hear now with the internet what's going on around the world without going around the world. And the Christian faith in America is somewhat different than the Christian faith around the world. Would you guys all agree? And so some of the things that we deal with here isn't necessarily issues that everybody else deals with. But every single believer has to deal with their darkness. But we don't like to talk about that darkness. You know, I think Junior preached a great word about being honest about how we're doing. And I think that's one of the just easiest places to start about dealing with our darkness. Just dealing with it. Because if we go around hiding that darkness and never even confronting it, let alone confessing it, you're going to spend a lot longer in that darkness. True freedom from that darkness is found in exposing it. It's found in exposing it. And so before I go too much further, let's jump into the Word. And I got to get a little bit of background, because I feel like it's really easy to take a passage of Scripture, just kind of pull it out, and like picture like this little shiny thing and talk about this little passage. But we don't know anything else that happened prior to that, or what makes that passage make sense. And as much as I'd hate to admit this, but I wish I actually would have had more time to do due diligence on this. But I'm just going to give you what I got. So you got to deal with that. In 2 Corinthians, Paul is dealing with the Corinthian church again. He didn't have to deal with many churches twice, but he dealt with the Corinthian church twice. And not like Thessalonians, where it's a couple of short books, some of them specifically about what's going to happen. He had to deal with Corinthians with a lot of stuff. Like a lot of stuff. Over a long period of time. And so we have 2 Corinthians. He's already written 1 Corinthians, which there's already another book that we don't have in between that. And he's visited them at least twice. Because he's talking about visiting them a third time. So he's talking to this Corinthian church. I'll be honest, I would probably be a little irritated. Like, really, guys? You can't figure some of this stuff out? And so he's talking to the Corinthian church, and in chapters 8 and 9, he's what we call chapters 8 and 9, he's talked about this gift, right, that he's going to be sending, or that they're going to be partaking of for this gift for Jerusalem. And in chapter 10, there's a huge shift in the letter. In chapter 10, it starts with now. So that's kind of like when we break by like big chapters. This is a big break in the letter. This is, now I, Paul, urge you. So can we admit and agree together that this is a huge transition, going from giving to, okay, now hold on. This is me, Paul, talking. It was always him talking, but we like to do that from time to time. It's kind of like with my kids sometimes. It's hard to take me seriously sometimes. I know that's hard to take serious, but it's hard to take me serious sometimes. But my kids know that if I drop my glasses and I look at you like this, I'm serious. To the point where one time I was getting serious with my cute little Malachi right there, and I dropped my glasses. I looked at him and I said, I'm serious. And he dropped his little head and said, I'm serious. And then it was really hard to take him serious. But Paul makes this shift in the letter to where he's kind of dropping his glasses and saying, look, okay, now this is kind of serious. Now you're all picturing Malachi doing that, aren't you? He says, now I, Paul, myself, urge you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. I who am meek when face to face with you, but bold towards you when absent. I ask that when I am present, I need not be bold with the confidence with which I propose to be courageous against some, who regard us as if we walked according to the flesh. For though we walk according to the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For our weapons of warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful, destruction of fortresses. I want to take a minute. So we've heard this preached a lot, and this is a great passage. But I want to say one thing is contextually, this passage is he's what he's starting to do is he's starting to tell this Corinthian church, hey, I'm not talking about you from flesh to flesh. What we need to do is we need to talk about some spiritual things to start pulling some stuff down. And so he's talking to this Corinthian church who is somewhat of a carnal church. And if you know anything about the city of Corinth, it's a port city. It was a very important city, kind of like what we have Seattle and New York and LA. These port cities bring in things. And they were very, in their mind, esteemed and a lofty people. They boasted in their wealth and their riches. They had columns made of just marble, beautiful columns, but it was their way of letting the world know that we are established. If I remember correctly, if I had the facts wrong, you can ask Pastor John, because he knows it. I think they were the third largest city at the time, next to Rome and Athens. It's either third or fourth. Either way, ask Pastor John. He knows. Pastor David's not here to pick on him, so I got it. You're next. So it was a very large city, very well-to-do. They loved their wealth, and they were proud about it. And so they did some boasting. And what had happened, and what we're getting ready to deal with, what had happened is these super apostles, as they call themselves, came into Corinth and started laying down their pedigree. Paul doesn't have the pedigree that we have. He doesn't have the accolades that we have. He doesn't have the degrees and the prominence that we have. And so what we're going to do is we're going to charge you for our services because we are super apostles. We got it going on, baby. And so what Paul's doing is he's writing to kind of refute them, but he has to start all over. Remember, he's written them 3 times, third letter. Been there twice. And now he's having to defend himself of who he is in their relationship and who he is as an apostle. And so he starts it off by saying, look, I'm not talking about warfare according to the flesh. We need to view this thing from a whole different level. So that's the context of we do not wage according to the flesh. He's saying, look, what's going on between us? It isn't flesh. This is spiritual. So we're going to deal with some things. He says, we are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. And we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ and ready to punish all disobedience whenever your obedience is complete. You are looking at things as they are outwardly. If anyone is confident in himself that he is Christ, let him consider then again within himself. Then just as he is Christ, so also are we. For even if I boast somewhat further about our authority, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, I will not be put to shame, for I do not wish to seem as if I could terrify you by my letters. For they say his letters are weighty and strong, but his personal presence is unimpressive and his speech contemptible. Let such a person consider this, that what we are in word by letters when we are absent, such persons we are also in deed when we are present. He said, but you better check yourself. So I can't just write good, but I can come with authority. You see, because I was picturing this, and Paul went through a lot of stuff. Like, he was beat up several times, and when he went to a new city, he didn't show up in these new cities like all freshly pressed and looking clean and looking good. Hair did to the side, because that's how Paul would have done it. That's how spiritual people do it. We do it to the side. He didn't show up this way, all clean. Now, he showed up beat up, man. Dude was like stoned, not stoned, but stoned with rocks. Several times. He was beaten and he was whipped. And he shows up to these cities and he starts talking about this grace of God and this good news. And this dude's like bloody and beaten. And so the Corinth church is like, he doesn't even wash his clothes. Like, he doesn't even do his hair to the side. Like, he does a straight back. Like, what is that? Seriously. And his beard is not even like clean shaven. It's like all grubby. And so what they started to do, they started to judge him based on how he was coming. He's like, his speech wasn't eloquent like Apollos. He didn't come in great word and deed and some eloquent man, but dude could write. And so they're saying, hey, when he comes, he's not impressive when he comes and meets with us. He's really not that impressive. But when he writes, he writes so different than when you meet him. And so he's basically calling them out on what's been said about him. And he says, hey, look, I recognize this. And I come forcefully if I have to. But I don't want to. And then he goes over, I'm going to jump to 11 just for time's sake. He says, I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Verse 1. But indeed you are bearing with me, for I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. For I betrothed you to one husband, that to Christ I might be present as a pure virgin. But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds have been led astray from the simplicity and the purity of devotion to Christ. For if one comes and preaches another Jesus who I have not preached, or you receive a different spirit in which you have not received, or a different gospel in which you have not accepted, you bear this beautifully. See, one thing I love about Paul, dude was sarcastic. Me and Paul, we're a lot alike, heritage to the side, and we're sarcastic. He dealt with it. I mean, there's a few times where he says things just like, if you said it from the pulpit, you get in trouble. And so I like that about Paul. He shoots straight. But he starts telling them, he's like, hey, look, you bear these false things beautifully. Because if you received anything other than what I brought, that's not pure and simple devotion. For I consider myself not as the least inferior to the most eminent apostles. But even if I am unskilled in speech, yet if I am not so in knowledge, in fact, in every way, we made this evident to you in all things. And he goes through and what he starts to do is defend his apostleship. And then he gets to the point, because we have to skip so much more. I wish we could just walk through all of this and just spend a whole day talking about these 3 chapters. But ain't nobody got time for that. In verse 21, to my shame I must say that we have been weak by comparison, comparing to these super apostles. You like that? Super apostles. But in whatever respect to anyone else is bold, I speak in foolishness. I am just as bold myself. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I speak as if insane. He's like, I'm out of my mind to even talk like this. See, Corinthians would talk like this and start comparing back one another, and Paul's like saying, hey, I don't want to compare, but you need to understand who I am. You need to understand where I come from. He says, I more so, and far more labors, and far more imprisonments. And see, here's the crazy thing. I think we do this sometimes in Christianity. Let me change it. Americans. How about that? Instead of saying that, comparing pedigree now of super apostleship, it's like, well, I got beat up more times than you did. I served Jesus harder than you did. I labored further. I went to this school longer, or I learned more about this topic, or you know what? I was an intern for 2 years, and I cleaned all these toilets. I've served more than you. Y'all haven't cleaned toilets. Not here, not like they have. Shoot. I'm joking. Okay. I value you guys cleaning. But I think that we can get that way. We would never admit it because we don't like to admit our weaknesses. That's where we're going. All right? And so Paul starts to talk about comparing in a sense of serving the Lord. He says, I've been beaten times without number, often in danger of death. 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. We're praying for him. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've been spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from countrymen, dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers in the sea, dangers among false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Apart from such things, there is this daily pressure on me of concern for all the churches. Who is weak without my being weak? Who is led into sin without my intense concern? You see, I read that and I feel like, dang, my life is way too comfortable. My wife is saying, please don't run out and get beaten with rods and stoned. Either way you want to take that. without getting hurt or persecuted or having lack of food or being content. But for me, there's this reality that Paul went through. Part of it was his calling. The Lord told him from the beginning, hey, you're going to suffer for my name's sake. But Paul almost wears this like a badge, like I could do this, not in a proud way, but hey, listen, I am willing to take the gospel wherever it takes me, no matter what, no matter the cost. And I feel like, and I'm going to speak for me personally because I'm not going to speak for anybody else, because that's not fair to you. But I think for me personally that there are times where I am not missionally minded and I'm me-minded. Because I think that if we're truly proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, it comes with a cost. It may not look like this cost, but it's a cost. We would call this an extreme cost, right? I don't think anybody's going to endure this. Most of us are like, yeah, I'm willing, man. But if this is the cost that Paul had to endure, what is my cost? What's my cost? Am I really, if I'm going to proclaim the gospel in our society today, you better believe there's going to be persecution. You're not going to have everybody like you all the time. And I'm going to be honest, that was one of my issues. I like to be liked. Most of us do. And the only people that don't like to be liked are the people who knows that everybody's a hater. They're a bunch of haters. Everybody's going to hate on me. Well, no, the problem is you don't really like to be liked and you're not really being likable. That's probably the truth. We're not always going to be liked. We're not always going to be embraced. We're not always going to be loved. That's what we're called to do to everybody else. And so we have to know that it comes with a cost. And then he makes this small shift and he says, if I have to boast, I will boast of what pertains to my weakness. I don't like that verse. Because if I have to boast in my weakness, I have to admit I have a weakness. And if I have to admit I have a weakness, then I don't come across as strong. I don't come off like a Corinthian. A Corinthian would never boast in their weakness. A Corinthian boasts in their strength, in their fine pressed Armani suits, and their pedigree papers that tell them that they're intelligent, and their beautiful marble pillars. They're this very important people, and they bring in important people. And so to boast in a weakness that's a terrible idea. So this morning I had a weakness. I didn't feel good. It was a natural weakness. Then there's moments where we have other weaknesses. Can we be honest? Man, we got weaknesses. I'm not always the most patient person. I know it's hard to believe. I know. I'm not always patient. I'm often impatient. And my impatience can drive me to frustration. And I get frustrated relatively easy. It's a weakness. It's one of my weaknesses. I'm also insecure at times. The Lord's working on it. But there's moments where I'm just not sure what in God's green earth I'm doing here. I was like, you want me to lead these kids and these people? Lord, have you lost your mind? I mean, Lord, look at this area of weakness and this area of weakness and this lack of qualification. And I start walking the Lord through all these reasons why I don't know why he called me. And then he leads me back to the scripture. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so the Lord taught me one cool thing. He's taught me lots of cool things, but this one in particular. He showed me that if I could just get before him and ask him what to do for the ministry, that's his ministry, not my ministry, he will tell me what to do. I thought that was a crazy idea. You mean you want me to ask you what to do with your ministry? Dang, that's a good idea. I just might do that. And I feel like the more that I don't really embrace and accept my weakness, but I acknowledge my weakness and have the Lord help me in my weakness, I find strength in that. And I know I didn't go back and read it, but it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 where he starts talking about that. He talks about this thorn in the flesh. But he asked God to take away this thorn in the flesh that he wouldn't be prideful because he was taken up into the third heaven. Like, I'll be honest, if the Lord takes me up in the third heaven, y'all are going to know. He went 14 years without telling nobody in a letter. Long time. Before he finally told everybody about this third heaven experience. Y'all would know. It would be like, what, Instagram, hashtag no filter? Hey, I went up to the third heaven, y'all. Here's what went down. And I would levitate down. But it says the Lord brought him a messenger of Satan to torment him, so that he might remain humble. See, what would happen in my life, and again, here's honesty. What would happen in my life if I felt like there was a messenger of Satan tormenting me? I would ask God, what did I do wrong? What area am I not satisfying you, Lord? Or what am I not doing good enough in ministry? Or am I not giving enough? Am I not loving enough? Am I not doing enough? Why is this messenger here tormenting me? I'm frustrated. I don't know what's going on. And God, what did I do wrong? And I would live through this cycle of, okay, Father, I'm going to confess whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but there's something holding me back in order to have torment. But then that would reveal the lie that my view of who he is wrong. Because he always is who he is, not based on my situation. My situation doesn't determine who he is. It should reveal who he is. And then he says, the Lord told him, my grace is sufficient for you. It's enough. My grace is enough. My power, the power that is through you, it's perfected in weakness. And he goes on to say, I'm gonna boast in my weaknesses. What would it look like if we boasted in our weaknesses and not our strengths? You know, I'm going to finish up with this because the Lord has been speaking to me about conduit. If you don't know what conduit is, metal conduit usually has electrical wires running through it. It's all throughout this building. Behind the walls, and electrical wires just go through conduit. It just holds it in place. There's also conduit that's usually PVC, like a plastic that water runs through it, right? And so this PVC, or this conduit, is going to be on my desk. Because sometimes the strength of the conduit is not what holds it. It's what goes through it. Because it holds the power. But I usually try to feel like I have to be the conduit. Or I have to be what goes through it. But my role is to be the conduit. But that's not easy, if I'm honest. Because sometimes, especially, again, as a pastor, I feel like I'm supposed to know the answers. Like I'm supposed to know what to do all the time. Like I'm supposed to know the Bible better than everybody else.